thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. I think as kind of Gabriel alluded to, that most of you probably know this, but the majority of our work is really conducted outside of the prison, and we do that by helping to create angel teams who basically give support to those coming out of prison. But we absolutely love interviewing people who have been formerly incarcerated and whose lives are such a good example of moral conduct. And I just think we learn more from them because of what they know than anyone else in the reentry work. And they have a special insight that you just couldn't have unless you've experienced prison culture. We especially love just talking with those who have been, through a transformation in their lives or have found redemption and purpose by going back into the prisons to serve the inmates who are there. And tonight I will be talking with Ray Aguilar, who serves here in California in prisons. And he's also a life coach, a mentor. He does a lot of work in prisons and does workshops. And I should say this, that I've met with Ray a couple of times now. And from my perspective, he's what I would call the real deal Christian who actually walks the talk. And so, Ray, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us tonight. And so thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David, and everyone for having me. Really was excited and looking forward to this, opportunity to share with you guys some of these insights that might inform your guys' work, as well as just kind of bringing awareness.
Yeah, I know I didn't mention everything that you do, but and one of the things that I found really interesting, and I just found this out, is that Ray purchased a house. I think it's in the Fresno area for people coming out of prison. So housing, as you probably know, is in short supply for people coming out. And I just think that's pretty amazing that you went out and purchased a house for people. And so maybe we can chat a little bit about that at some point. But first, let's just dive in and tell us a little bit about your background and where did you grow up and what was your early life like?
For sure. Like I said, thank you for having me. Yeah, I grew up in Long Beach, California. I guess where could I start? My parents, they were teenagers when they had me. And so there wasn't too much that they were able to give me that they didn't know themselves. So it was a struggle raising me. Financially, they were working all the time. And so I was a latchkey kid, and I'd be home long hours by myself, so there wasn't really a constant parental presence there. I know they loved me dearly. That's why they worked and they provided. But at the same time, they couldn't give me something that they didn't have themselves. My mother was 16, my father was 15. And so, they went straight into the workforce. And I just remember, waking up with them gone and going to sleep with them gone. And so, they had it in their mind to provide me a house, which is ideal, for a family, the American dream. But the only problem was they sacrificed their presence in my life. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I grew up. I think my sibling came along 8 years later, so I was pretty much by myself. That age gap kind of left me feeling like I was, alone. And so sadly, you always move in the direction where you feel like something's missing. And so at an early age, I got involved in substance abuse as well as gang affiliation.
How old were you? How old were you
I
at that
was
point?
12 years old when I began drinking and exposure. When you're seeking a sense of belonging and love in all the wrong places, you find people who are more seasoned in that lifestyle. And so the exposure to methamphetamines came early on. And so by the age of 14, I was addicted to methamphetamines. I was engaged in illegal activity. Yeah, a lot of bad things that just kind of further plunged me into that lifestyle.
You were 12 years old when all this started. That's kind of, it's heartbreaking, honestly. And But how is it that you kind of got in trouble with the law and were sent to a prison or to a youth detention center? How did that happen?
Yeah, I definitely seen my behavior escalating over time. Um, it was attention seeking, definitely, wanting that, peer validation, wanting to feel like I belonged, a part of the crowd. And so I seen my behavior not only becoming worse, but more brazen. I started selling drugs, I started using drugs, and so and there wasn't no one, I strongly believe today, if there's no one defining the values in the home, then values are going to be defined somewhere. And so unfortunately for me, they were defined in the streets. And so, looking back, it was just so backwards, the life that I was living. Right was wrong, left was right. It was just so, you know upside down. And so, I mean, there's really not much I can equate it to other than completely lost, really, really lost.
Did your parents intervene or try to intervene at all? They must have seen something's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a moment where my father, when I was in prison at the age of 36, I started to kind of just reach out and talk to him about, like, important issues. And he was going through his own existential um crisis, if you will, like learning about himself. And I remember him taking the opportunity to apologize. And I was like, well, what do you want to apologize for? And he's like, well, as I'm learning about myself and about the choices that I made in raising you, he says, remember, he was a kid when he had me, so
Yeah.
I definitely extend grace to him because of that. um but he said, what I learned is that the most crucial time of a child's life is from the age of 2 to 10, because those are the formative years. And at that time, I remember thinking to myself, well, I'll just wait till he gets older so that I could be more part of his life. And he said, but the problem with that is, as you got older, I lost you to the streets. And so he was really like a hands-off person. I don't really remember him ever taking an active role. I more see him, the relationship that we had, because he was also raised by just his mother, no father. So I felt like, and him raising me, he introduced me to his fatherlessness. Like, hey, you're in the world alone. You need to survive. You need to figure it out. So no real like support. He was
Yeah.
just basically giving me what was given to him.
Yeah. So how did you get into prison? What age were you when that
So
happened?
yeah, like I said, the criminality started to escalate. I was involved in selling drugs. Nothing that I'm proud of. A lot of shame early on, processing that. But that, selling drugs escalated to a drug debt. Being confronting somebody over a drug debt, and one thing led to another, and a man's life was taken. So at age 18, I was sentenced to 28 years to life. I was entering a adult facility, um, and completely clueless about life. At the time, I was newly married. I had just my wife had just given birth to our daughter, and so I can see in a lot of ways I was perpetuating the same thing that my parents had. Just had no business having a family, but yet still starting a family. I wasn't nothing, and I wasn't a father. I was a gang member. That's what I was. Sadly, and that's what I thought, that I was going to be able to raise a family by doing criminal activity. But that's
Mm,
how warped my thinking was.
yeah. We have a lot of people here that do go into the prisons as chaplains. So how would you, it's because it's important, I think it's kind of important also to know just the environment and the culture, but how would you describe prison in your experience on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I
A-
felt it.
And the other question is, did you get comfortable with it, with the routine?
I felt like, so early on, I wasn't that person who got really entrenched in the prison culture. Um, During my sentencing, the mother of the man that I had murdered, she had an opportunity to address me, and she told me something. She said something that I live with, and forced me to really rethink my life and my decisions. She said at my sentencing, I'll never have an opportunity to hear my son knock on my door ever again. And that right there, that was a reality for me. It was no longer, just about drugs or about gangs. I realized, firsthand that how I impacted someone's life, how I destroyed their life. And so I remember being sentenced and just thinking to myself that like, um, this is not the person I wanted to become. I was disgusted with myself. And so I left that, moment rethinking how prison was going to look for me. And so, of course, early on, prison culture is all about prison politics. It's all about, gangs, drugs, you name it. Every, debauchery you can think of is going on. But there, lied a choice for me. Do I want to continue that lifestyle, or do I want to make some changes? Problem for me was that you don't know what you don't know. And I felt like, all I was exposed to early on is gangs and drugs. And so that's the only lifestyle I knew. So I didn't know no way out. I
Yeah.
thought that was it. I just realized that like, no, this is not what I wanted to become. This is not the man that I wanted to become. And so now I was at a crossroads of like, what am I going to do going forward?
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to make some tough choices. And so the culture definitely doesn't support them choices. I felt like,
Talk about that a little bit. Why doesn't the prison culture support those choices? I know it sounds obvious, but people have made it through prison. You did.
right, for sure. For a number of reasons. So, as I mentioned earlier, because of my, my thirst for acceptance, I defaced my body with all sorts of tattoos, gang affiliation. So wherever I went, whatever prison I went to, I was always associated with this gang. And so right away, people are like, they see me as one of those, even though that's not the case, even though I was, I wanted different for my life. And so I always felt like that chained me to my past. So I was always having to confront, like, they're like, oh, so in there, it's like a way to bond with people. Where are you from? What gang are you from? Where do you live? And so that is like a tool that people use to bond. And for me, it was like, nah, that's not what I wanted. And so I had to find myself um bonding in different ways, and not in the usual ways that people are accustomed to. So those are the things that I had to learn anew for the first time. Like, no, I'm not that person. I'm this person. And so, yeah, that was particularly challenging because every part of me was like wanted to find comfort in the mass, right? Like the group. That's what people do, right? They find cliques and they feel safe in cliques. But I realized that like, making those choices, um, is countercultural to prison. And so now you find yourself isolated, ostracized. Oh, you're not part of the program. Well, then, and that's not a good feeling. That's not, that's a very uncomfortable feeling, especially if like I've always grown accustomed to people please, just do things just to people please. So now I had to learn a different way of relating. And I had to like figure out, well, what are my values? What are my principles? What do I believe? And so many things on many levels were being challenged in my life. And I was so young, but I'm thankful for specific people that I feel God had just orchestrated in my life that helped me at that particular moment. Because like without that guidance or without that support, who knows, the decision I made. But I just felt it was that support that I needed, that really helped me that helped support the direction I wanted to take my life.
Yeah, you had said something that earlier that I thought was very interesting. You said you met the mother of your victim, and that
Yes.
what she said made a huge impact on you. And then you said that you used the word, I was disgusted.
Yes.
I understand that from my own past, but that word disgusted is kind of an important changer, isn't it? I mean, it kind of like, if you're disgusted with yourself, it means you see something in yourself you just didn't see before.
Right.
You didn't
Right.
realize the impact of who you were on other people before.
Right.
So here you are. And do you think that is that the thing that sort of started you thinking differently?
Yeah, I noticed because no matter what, I mean, I grew up in the streets, so it wasn't like people didn't know me. People knew me, and sometimes people would like glamorize that lifestyle. I mean, we see it all the time. in music and behaviors, manners, right? We see that. And so what I see is that a lot of people romanticized that lifestyle. And I was like, no, like nothing about it. Like it ruined my life. And so when I would find myself around people, normally in the past, I would have just nodded like, yeah, been the person in the background. But then I had to start being a little bit more assertive and like, no, that's not a way to live. No, that's this, that's despicable behavior, like stuff like that. And so I no longer romanticized it. I no longer like glamorized it. I no longer envied it. It was just like, no, it ruined lives. And I know, when you're a kid, and I look back, like you said, I was 12 years old when I made a decision to join a gang. Nowhere in my wildest dream did I ever think that, oh, this decision right here is going to land me into prison, and ultimately taking a man's life and land me with a prison sentence of 28 years to life. But that's just the natural progression of it. But when you're a kid and you have no guidance, no one telling you like, hey, you better think about the choices you're making. All you think it's all fun. You're very nearsighted, like just in the moment. And so as I'm getting older, I'm like, no, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I wanted for my life, especially sitting with the shame that I just abandoned my daughter who was 6 months, um, included on destroying a mother's life. I mean, there's so many things that I sat with early on in prison and just, had to like seek God for forgiveness and find, a way to right those wrongs. And I felt like I wasn't going to be one of those ones to be like, oh, I'll just wait till I get out. I'm like, no, I need to do that now. I need to start now. Whether I have, and that was the thing, right? At that time, I was convicted in 1997. So it was understood that you're not going to get out of prison. Unlike today, a lot of the laws have changed. So for me, it was like when people find themselves in a hopeless situation, they kind of just give up. But I was like, no, I'm not gonna give up. At the same time, like it needs to start now, And so that's when I started to make, a life-changing decisions for myself that I realized kind of landed me to where I am today,
Yeah,
fortunately, so.
yeah. I think it's fascinating that I want to ask you, because you're talking about a transformation. Um, and one of the things that's very important is you just didn't sulk over self-blame and all the things that you had done. But how did you actually right those wrongs that you felt that you had in you that needed to be righted? What did you actually do in prison?
Yeah. So, I was thinking about like, I always ask myself, like certain things like, how did I kind of get to where I'm at? And what I noticed is that the sincerity, the genuineness of like my journey and wanting to learn about myself, um, is what I felt like was really like honored by God. And I say that because there was a moment that I remember. Um, I was on a level 4 prison, and for some of you who don't understand what that means, that's a maximum security California prison. It's called level 4. And so I started my prison sentence at 19 years old on a level 4. And so there's a lot of hopelessness there just because people have ridiculous amount of time, and they're there for serious crimes. And so just a lot of it's just a lot of evil, right? Anyways, so sometimes even if I wasn't a part of something, there would be people who know me from the past, and they would feel the need to want to like include me in certain things, and they'll be like, hey Ray, this is what's going on the yard. Even if I didn't want to be a part of it, they're like, hey, stay away from this area, so and so is going to get stabbed, be assaulted, right? And I remember this particular moment. I'm working on myself. I'm already separating from the gang. I'm in my lane, going to church, doing different things. And so I come across this information, and I remember I went back to the cell, and I told my cellmate, I said, hey, let's get some food, let's get some books, because we're probably gonna go on a lockdown. And as soon as I said that, right, my stomach turned, and I thought to myself, here a man's life is gonna hang in the balance, and all I could think about is my physical comfort, like soups and getting situated. And I realized that even though with me wanting to change, there's still a lot of internal work that needed to be done that I didn't realize had me still indifferent and apathetic about human life. And so when I realized that, I remember praying sincerely and asking God, like, I want to see harm the way you see it. I want to see sin the way you see it. I want to see because I felt like I had been desensitized. The lifestyle that I lived from a young age desensitized me to things that I should have grieved over, things that should have broken my heart, things that I should have, you know, blushed over, but I didn't. I was just indifferent. And so I knew there was something wrong with me. And so I just prayed and I was like, God, I don't know how to like heal this. I don't know how to work through this. I just felt like the pain that I carried kind of made me indifferent to other people's pain.
Mm.
So, with that, I believe that sincere prayer was honored because I was eventually transferred from that prison to a lower level, which is a level 3, and I became part of a program, and it was hospice, right? And so I signed up for that program, and not unbeknownst to me, that program really transformed my perspective about life, about values, about what's important. And I
Mm.
had the opportunity during my time, my association with hospice, as a volunteer, to be able to sit with men who were terminally ill, and I seen what mattered the most to them. They weren't talking about money. They weren't talking about
Mm.
missed opportunities. They weren't talking about their friends from the street. They were talking about family. They were sitting with the shame of how they, had abandoned their family. So for me, it really changed my perspective. And it was a selfless program. And so I felt like that really kind of humanized, it kind of gave me that back that I was missing, because I was just sitting in support of someone who was, dealing with their terminal illness. And so, yeah, that I could attribute a lot of growth to that program and being part of that. And so like I said, God just knew what I needed. He knew that my heart really wanted to see the lifestyle for what it was. And so that's kind of a major turning point in my life.
Oh, that's beautiful. When did you really have the idea that you wanted to come back and return to prison to help other inmates? But you get
Yeah,
out, you don't
yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
go, oh my gosh, I'm going to head back to prison.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? Is that like none of it was like, oh, I'm gonna do it in the future, because like
Mm.
people usually change. No, let me take that back. Sometimes there is no incentive to change, so people kind of stay stuck. And so for me, they weren't releasing people from prison, so I just wanted to change for change's sake. But what happened is that kind of helped me for when that time did come. They seen like, oh wow, you had been working on yourself way before the laws had even changed. But what it did is it showed me that I could start making a difference where I was at. I didn't have to wait till I got out.
Mm.
So I was the guy who
Love
started
it.
to like, you know what, what's needed here. And so like whatever was missing at the institution, I was like, well, let's try to create it. And so that's how I kind of got into curriculum development. I got my associate's degree in behavioral social science. Substance abuse, I started educating myself, started going to college. And I was fortunate to go to institutions that were offering these things. So I took
Mm.
advantage of them, and I realized that I could take that education and start developing curriculum and helping guys who struggle with the same thing. Because that was me. Like I wanted to change, but had no idea of how to go about that. And so I was like, how can I support other people in their journey, and how can I help them? And so
Mm.
I found myself um, developing curriculum where there was needed, and I always ended up in prisons where it was underserved. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to step up and help other guys in creating these curriculums. And so
Well, you actually had everything you needed to create that curriculum, it sounds to me, because you were right in their shoes and you had come out of those shoes into some a little bit of a different place. So it sounds to me like you could probably more easily, relate to people that way. So tell us a little bit about what kind of things you do in the prisons now.
yeah, so a couple different roles. I'm involved in a few different organizations. I'm program director for Men Collaborative, and so what they are is they're with the offices of victim services. Uh, what we do is we we facilitate what's called victim offender dialogues. So what that is if a survivor who has experienced harm, whether it be directly or maybe the family member, and they wanted to have a conversation with the person responsible, they would reach out to the Office of Victim Services. Victim Services will reach out to us, and we would begin that dialogue. We'll meet with the responsible party. We'll meet with the survivor, and see if the person responsible has capacity to have that conversation. And so it's what's called a restorative justice modality, and it's basically honoring the needs of both survivor as well as responsible party. Because as I shared with you, I was a hurt person hurting people, and so one of the things that I feel that that makes me effective when it comes to prison ministry is that I don't look at the men or women inside as offenders. I look at them as like, hurt people who are hurting people. And so, they're survivors just as well. And so when I validate them as, see them for who they are as humans, and see them for God's potential, I feel like that defensiveness, those barriers start to come down, and then they can begin to work on themselves, and then the accountability and all those things come into place. So that's one of the things that I do. The other thing is I do workshops. Substance abuse. I'm a licensed substance abuse counselor, so I created a curriculum. It's called the Wellness and Recovery Program, and so it's based on relapse prevention. I actually provide that workshop at a prison that's known for its recidivism rate, meaning that it's really high. A lot of them are like third, fourth termers, and we targeted that prison just because, for that reason. Obviously there's something missing, and so I'm hoping to bring the component of relapse prevention tools that can help them stop coming back to prison. And so I work on the substance abuse piece in that workshop. So a lot of different things, I mean, for me, what motivates me is, I found healing. I found support in my journey of change in those rooms, because like I said, I didn't have the guidance growing up. My parents were gang members, so I was a second generation gang member. And so I didn't know what I didn't know. But when I went into those rooms and they started to teach me about nonviolent communication, when they started to teach me about various coping tools, I was like, what? Like, man, this is life changing. This is transformational. I remember not even knowing what a principle was. Like you mentioned about having principles and morals. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that meant. I'm like, huh? That's how I felt oblivious and ignorant I was about just basic life. And so that, and that's rampant. That's that there's a lot of that inside there. So for me, I feel like if I show up, the men will show up, right? For whatever reason, I don't care the reason why they're in the room. I just know that now I have a captive audience, and I think that like you said, that relatability, to share that story so that they can connect and be like, hey, you're really no different from me. I do feel like I'm tangible hope for them, because when I share my story, they're like, oh wow, what? Like they didn't know that. They didn't. And I tell them, no, I mean, it took work, but at the same time it's possible. And so I feel like uh me doing that kind of inspires them to do the work too, because at the end of the day, they want to be they want to they want to love their family, they want to be there for their family. They just need support in their journey of healing, you know.
When I first met you, I was kind of scratching my head when I heard that your background, what it was, and this guy doesn't have any taint of prison on him. That's a pretty thorough heart cleansing, I
Thank you.
would say.
Yeah, thank you for that.
The other thing I wanted to just ask you about, because to me it's a very interesting, one of the workshops that you do, or one of the things that you do, is your victim offender dialogue. And I know you told me about something the other day. You were talking to somebody. Can you relate a little bit about what that work is like, and how somebody is able to sit across the table or sit across the room or wherever they are. How does that work? And how do you kind of start it off, and how did somebody work through some of those issues that are definitely going to come up?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we do, I mean, there's no time expectancy. I mean, it could be, a year-long process.
Mm,
Um, Usually we meet with the survivor and kind of work with them because both are on their healing journey, right? And so we meet with the survivor to figure out, well, what's the what's their underlying needs, what is it that they hope to gain from this conversation. And so once we understand that, then I'll meet with the responsible party. I'll go to the prison. He could be as far as, San Quentin. I've been fortunate to and honored to have done at least 5 dialogues so far, and some have been in Tehachapi, some Ironwood. I'm doing one right now at CRC, and so after I've learned from the survivor what is it that they hope to gain from the conversation, from the dialogue, I'll meet with the responsible party and see and determine if they have capacity to show up in
mm,
the way that the survivor needs them to. So I'll talk about their accountability, just kind of get a feel for where they're at. But like I said, I understand like some of the barriers that exist. I understand how sometimes shame will make us talk about it in a way that's not so accountable, but
yeah.
mitigates our role. And so I try to like bring that like light. I try to shed light to that so that they can understand that like, oh wow, I didn't see that. You know what, you're right. And all I do that, it's their journey. I can't do it for them, but just by me sharing my story and how, I minimized, how I avoided taking responsibility, kind of helps them. It gives them space to like acknowledge, oh, I've done that too, or I'm doing that as well. And so, and like I said, that's not that don't happen overnight. It's a year-long process, building rapport. Um, and then I see a lot of growth. I see a lot of growth. But I think the transformative um peace is when they finally meet and hear firsthand accounts. Just like me, when I heard the mother, say what she said, like I couldn't dismiss that. I couldn't erase those words from my head. And so those were the words that led to me, changing the direction of my life, because I was like, I can't destroy another person's life like that. And so I came to the point where it was like, you know what, I'd rather be hurt in prison than create another victim.
Mm,
Just for at least I'm standing for something that's right. And so I
yeah.
feel like working with the men, sharing my story, kind of, because they are. I haven't met a person yet that doesn't want to participate. A lot of them want opportunity to take accountability, to express their remorse, but they just need to feel supported. Imagine, and so for me, I think that the relatability is like, oh, you were in my shoes.
Mm,
Oh, and to hear that, it kind of gives them a little safe space to be able to
yeah.
like be a little more accountable.
How do you work with inmates? And this goes right to everything you're talking about, but how do you work with inmates that just don't trust that they're going to have a better future? I mean, they can go to your classes and you can see them. How do you spot them, and how do you work with them?
It's funny because I deal with a lot of resistant people. And
Hmm.
for one, of course, building rapport is huge. It's important. Um, I think for me, one thing I realized in prison is that everything's a reminder of what you've done, from the clothes that you wear to the CDC number that you have. When you go into classification, and that's an annual thing, they'll read off all your charges. And I remember like working on myself and changing and feeling so dejected and like man, and just feeling. And so for me, like to like contribute to that and just tell them how bad or how terrible people are, I feel like it's counterproductive. It's not effective. It doesn't help. So instead, I approach it with like, you know what, have you ever, more of empowering, trying to bring the best out of them, seeing them for their potential, because I felt like when people believed in me, I started to believe in myself. you know, because there was a time where I thought that I would never change. Like, man, this is it. But then, you know, when people started validating me, no, hey, you're a good person. Oh man, man, you got some character, man. You got some strength to stand up to that, man. I start feeling good about myself. I feel like, man, maybe I can do this. So I try to support that, and I look for the best in people, you know. So I don't see them for what they're in prison for, you know. Instead I see them for like what they envision for their life, and I support that in any way I can.
So how do you help an inmate become vulnerable in a place that sees vulnerability as an extraordinary weakness and even maybe fatal?
For sure, for sure.
Because
I
you're trying to open people up and have them go into the heart, and as I understand prisons, they're pretty hard places on the outside. You got to be hard on the outside. You may be something on the inside, but you can't show vulnerability.
Yeah.
So how do you crack through that?
Yeah, well, I think what has helped me a lot is just like using my personal story and how I hid behind a mask for so long, and basically like pointing out that, you know, strength is when you're vulnerable. You know, strength is, it's not weakness. It's when you're able to be vulnerable, and kind of like you know, change the narrative, you know, especially when it comes to prison, like showing them like, hey, this doesn't make me weak because, you know, I'm taking a parenting class, you know. I was just I was clueless, you know, and so I own things about myself. You know, and I indirectly, I never really call nobody out because I don't want to put no one on the spot, but I kind
Mhm.
of use examples. I use myself, how I used to be the person in the back sitting and didn't want to participate. You know, I'll use things like that, and you know, I start to see, you know, people open up. They'll come out their shell. They'll start being a little bit more honest, a little bit more transparent. But I felt like I had to do that first. And what I noticed is they respect that, because then it's like, okay, now they see you as a person. You're not there. And I tell them all the time, look, I'm not here to educate you or teach you anything, you know, because I learn more from you guys than I do, you know, coming in here trying to teach you guys. And so a lot of them really appreciate that. Like I said, everything is a humanizing process for me. You know, shake their hand. Hey, how you doing? I look them in the eye. How's it going? You know, I learn their names, everything, because for me, that's personal. It's not like, oh, I'm just, you know, having a group. No, you know, ask them, hey, so how was your week? You know, have you talked to your family? How's everything going? So I remember recently we had a graduation, and one of the gentlemen, he walked up to me and he goes, hey Ray, I don't know if you realize this or you recognize this, but every single person in this class, when they leave, they shake your hand. And I was like, okay, like I didn't see the significance of that. He goes, no, you don't
Mhm.
understand. He said,
Mhm.
all the other groups, he says, I see them, they just run out of the door like, I'm done, I'm getting out of here. He said, but they take their time to come shake your hand. And what that means is that they respect you and they appreciate like you coming here. And that really
Yeah.
touched my heart. So I realized that like, oh man, you know what? That this is, you know, and so for me, you know, I feel like it's seeing them for who they are, you know, seeing them for what they envision for their life is validating them as persons. And that's what really kind of brings it out of them.
No, that's great. Last question for you. So we got probably a number of people here that are chaplains that do go into prisons right now. So what advice would you give to our chaplains here tonight, to who are working with people who are about to be released?
Mhm.
There's a lot of fear and trauma around release. I don't think people always understand that.
Yeah. You mentioned, you know, me purchasing a home for reentry.
Yeah, that's
And
wonderful.
I think everything, one of my mottos is that I use is for us by us. And the reason I say that because like people don't really know the struggle until they've been in it. And so I went through the whole transitional, and I remember just them putting me in a place that wasn't supportive, that was in fact um um it was counter constructive. Everything about it was just wrong, and struggling to like convince my pro officer, struggling to convince the powers that be that, hey, this is not helpful. You know, they had me in an intensive inpatient program, drug tested every, you know, every hour, and couldn't have
Mm.
access to my phone. So I think that what's important is that we understand the needs of the people who are getting out and helping to connect them to resources, educating them about resources, making them aware that there's things out there. I might not be the resource center, but I know somebody that can help you and that can, at least contribute something to your success, to setting you up for success. And so when people feel like that they're investing in someone else's process, they can appreciate that. I have a lot of guys who reach out to me like, hey, I'm looking for resources in this area. Yeah, okay, it's not directly tied to our transitional, but I need to find them a place to go. I need something in their area. And so I think just be open and sensitive to those needs. It's kind of like what we've seen in the Bible, right? If you tell someone to be warm, don't just tell them, oh, be warm and be merry, help them with a jacket, help them with a jacket. So that's what I try to
Yeah,
try
do
to follow my
something.
life. Yeah, do something, it don't have to be much. I'm not saying you got to go out and buy a house. I'm just, it's just, like the small things really make a difference in people's life.
So, well, thank you, Ray. We're going to open it up now because it's about 6:44. We're going to open this up to questions from anybody here in the audience. I don't know, Gabriel, you want to take this piece on?
Sure. And Ray, thank you for all of those thoughts
I
that
got a
you've
lot
shared.
more you could say, I know.
Yeah. Eleanor had a question in the chat earlier, and she asked, did you ever struggle with your worthiness for being forgiven, or did you always feel God's love for you?
I think that early on I felt a lot of shame. I carried a lot of shame. Um, very skeptic about God. And the reason being, because I didn't grow up in a house that like, not even being Hispanic, usually Hispanics, they go to church on like certain holidays. That wasn't my family, we didn't go to church at all. So, the whole concept of God was like foreign to me. And so, I didn't understand about forgiveness. I didn't understand about none of those things. I had to learn them. And then, but what I realized is that, and what I'm thankful for is that forgiveness it didn't come without action. It wasn't just, there was meaning behind it. And so, I think, reading the scriptures for the first time and understanding that like, hey, God forgives us, but we can't continue in the same lifestyle, kind of really had an impact on me, because I didn't get, stuck in, oh, I'm forgiven, I can just, keep on living the way I was and I'll still be forgiven. So I didn't adopt that mindset. I was more like, no, repent and bear fruits of repentance, and so that's kind of the track that I went. And I'm thankful for it because, yeah, I'm, not part of the problem no more. Just trying to be part of the solution. Sure.
And I'll add thanks for that. I'll add my own kind of question here. And that is when you're interacting with people on the inside, are there any markers that you kind of see or like indicators that like this person has truly witnessed an internal transformation from their previous way of thinking and life that led them to incarceration to I would love to have you be out of this place and making like a positive change in society, because it feels like there's a real spectrum there of development. And
Right.
one of the areas that we have been increasingly focusing on is what is happening behind the prison doors before they re-enter society. Because if somebody hasn't done that work in themselves and they're just, okay, I'm out now,
Right.
trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
it feels like that's where recidivism sort of tends to really come into play, is that person hasn't maybe made that decision, like, no way I'm coming back or whatever. Do you have any thoughts on that you could share that would just either help us be a part of that transformation journey for others, or just even recognize like, oh, this person maybe is not in a space where like, if they came out and we really tried to support them our best,
Yeah.
they're really not actually ready, I guess. Do you have
Yeah.
any idea on that?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. One of the things that I often tell the guys, because I asked him, I posed that exact question, like, how do you know when you're ready for society? How do you know when you're ready to get out of prison? And all of them come up with some, all sorts of ideas. And for me, I tell them it's simple, when you outgrow prison and you no longer fit into this place. And so they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when you no longer succumb to the culture of prison, you think different, you behave different, you carry yourself different, because culture in prison is very, man, it's just could be very negative and very violent. A lot of things run rampant, and so you always know when a person is in a good place is when they're aloof from that, they're set apart from that, and actually working on the internal things. You hear it in their conversation, you hear it in their mannerisms. You can always see, like, hey, when someone's doing extensive work and when someone's doing a little bit of work. And not to invalidate no one, because it is a journey, right? It's a process. But for me, that's a huge indicator, is how much do I still see prison in them. A lot of people, they use the term institutionalized, and you can see it. You can see it when the only way they know how to relate is on a prison level. They're not thinking forward thinking. They're not thinking. They're just in the moment, right? Like what's going on in the yard and that. But when they're thinking about like real life issues, like, oh, about a job, about a trade, about so you could see that they have a sense of purpose. They have some idea of what life looks like outside of prison. To me, that's an indicator that they're being reflective. They're forward thinking. They're no longer just anchored to the moment. And sometimes that substance abuse and that life will do that. It'll anchor you to the moment. You're just nearsighted, like just what's going on the yard right now. Yeah,
That's a really good point. I just wanted to say this. I had a guy that I worked with a number of years ago, and he was in a transitional housing unit. And he said, we were talking on the phone, and he said, I'm just looking around the room right now, and there was 11 guys. And he said, I can tell you, this is the guy that goes with what you were just talking about. He doesn't fit the prison culture anymore. He just definitely did not fit that anymore. So what popped out was all the stuff that did fit. So he could see, and he was telling me, he said, I'm looking at guys right now, I can tell you just the words that they use, the way their body language is and what it says, whether or not they talk about the future, whether they think they have a purpose. So I think those are really, really important little bullet points that chaplains need to be looking at, because they may not be saying anything, but there's something going on, and it's being externalized in all these different ways that we need to know how to look at that so that we can address it and be more effective at it. That's
right. Definitely. Yeah, those are definitely indicators for sure.
Susan had a question. How did you, Ray, get connected to the Bible and a connection to God? I mean, you kind of touched on it a little earlier, but I think, was there some introduction that was made to you that made sense? Or that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, like I said, I think about these moments. My defining moment, right, was, so I arrived at reception center, which is the first prison they send you to when you begin your time. It was Delano State Prison, and I remember, mind you, I'm affiliated with the gang. I don't know about change. I'm already like having this internal struggle, like this is not it, but I'm here, and I'm probably gonna die here. So they came around the cells, some random person, hey, you know what, when in the morning when the doors rack, there's gonna be a riot, one race on another race, and we're going to initiate it, right? So without save you guys all the details. So it happened, and I remember like why, like what's the point? I don't, nothing's going on. There was like, it made no sense whatsoever, but yet I participated in it because I was like, I was clueless, and not to make excuses, but I was like kicking and struggling inside with God, like, why is this happening? What's going on? Anyways, so I get sent to the hole, and when you get in trouble in reception, like you lose all contact with family, like you're just kind of lost in the system. No one hears from you and everything. So, my mom, you know, she loves me dearly, and so she hadn't heard from me for like 6 months, and so she took it upon herself to come to Delano State Prison, and like, what's going on with my son? And so they pulled me out, but before they pulled me out, they told her that I was involved in a racial riot. And so I arrive at the visiting room, and she's crying. And I don't remember nothing about that day, but I do remember her telling me, "You're still causing me pain in there." And so that was enough. That still gets me choked up. That was enough for me to go back to my cell. And I remember getting on my knees, and my cellie was like, what's going on? Are you all right? And I'm like, man, don't worry about me. Like, leave me alone. Don't mind your own business. I was just so upset and so angry. And I remember crying to a God for the very first time. Never didn't know who I'm praying to. You know, I could have been praying to the wall, but I was like, God, if you're like out there, if you're real, if you're, help me. I just want to change. I don't know how to. And I can't continue like this, you know. After hearing the mother of the man that I had murdered, hearing my mom, I'm like, I can't carry this no more. This is too much for me. And so I feel like that prayer right there was enough for me to I felt like I had an encounter with God that day, because everything changed. Everything changed. And like, throughout my journey, he started to give me the character fortitude to deal with all those challenges, but it wasn't there before. And so that sincere prayer, I felt like I had to experience things over and over within prison to develop that in my life, so that I could deal with the gang component. I could deal with the substance abuse. I can finally address it, because it had always been a kryptonite, if you will, you know, something, a weakness of mine. And so that prayer was enough for God to like send me what I needed. Yeah, so that's how I met God in there.
Mhm. Are there this is kind of a question we've been again addressing on this journey of internal transformation. Do you think there are any external factors that can come into play to really hasten that transformation, or make it happen better, I guess?
Yeah, no,
Or
for
is it
sure. For sure.
everybody is just on their own journey, and eventually they have to hit that wall somewhere in their own experience where they just make their own personal decision, and it doesn't matter, what anybody is saying or doing? Like, how does that work in your view, do you think?
Yeah, I think that, man, just supporting people, just showing up for people will, you know, empower them to show up. You know, sometimes I've had to love people more than they love themselves. You know, and I work in treatment, and sometimes I find myself manipulating the people that I'm trying to help because they're giving up. But I'm like, no, you know, I'm not gonna let them give up. And so I find myself fighting for them harder than they're fighting for themselves. But I'm okay with that, because I know that, like, I needed someone fighting for me when I was a kid. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep supporting people, and keep showing up. I feel like they'll show up. You know, I've always valued and respected the volunteers, the people that went in, because I was like, I remember learning, there was a sergeant who was sponsoring one of our groups. It was um a fellowship, a men's fellowship, and I started to ask him questions, and I come to learn that his father was murdered when he was a kid, and that struck me, because I was like, and you're sitting amongst us? Like, that's the first thing that hit my mind. Like, you don't blame us? Like, you don't have no resentment? And he's like, no. And so for me, it was like, you know, him showing up just gave me so much more like appreciation for people and their sacrifice. And here I mean, he didn't know me from the next person, but yet he was showing up, and I felt like he was communicating love just by his presence. And that was like, man, that was just breaking like all those walls down for me. And I just respected him so much.
And we had a follow-up about your connection to the Bible personally. Like, was there, like, how did you get into then the Bible? Sounds like you had a visit with God at some point in time.
Yeah, no, I definitely I just started reading. I It's funny because someone introduced me to just like leisurely reading and like novels. And I remember thinking to myself, like, yeah, this ain't gonna contribute nothing to my life. It's just another escape. So you know what? I'm not gonna read that. I said, what should I read that's gonna like help me? And I was like, well, some people read the Bible in here. I never read the Bible before. So I was like, you know what? Let me just see what's in here. And I didn't understand. I was like, why is this story redundant? Like I keep reading, and talking about the synoptic gospels, right? I'm like, why do they keep on reading the same story? And I was like, but I just read it over and over. Like I'd be honestly bored, and I'll just be reading it. And then I'm like, oh, that's what it's saying. Oh, and so just light. And so honestly, and the way I came across the Bible is like my mom's dear, she played a huge role. I was in trouble, and she had a chaplain pull me out. And mind you, I'm hanging out with these guys, and they're like, Reynaldo Aguilar, report to the chaplain's office. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for the chaplain. I'm not going over there, right? And so I'm just trying to hold up that facade, right? But I still went, and all he had to say is like, hey, look, I know you didn't sign up, but this is from your mom. And I was like, oh. And so I just kept it. I went to the hole, I got in trouble, I kept that Bible. And so it always was accessible because it was in my personal property. I wasn't getting rid of that Bible because I thought, man, I'm going to die in here. It's the only thing I have of my mom. I'm not getting rid of it. But at those vulnerable moments that I was like, God, and I just opened it and opened it and read it and read it. And before I knew it, like Spirit started like speaking to me, started opening my understanding, started helping me like, man, there's a lot of treasure in here. I mean, I felt like it started to correct what was wrong in my thinking.
Mm. I would say that and Christian scientists would jump on this bandwagon too, Ray. That is self-examination, remorse, repentance, reform. I mean, if I could just use those words, that's kind of your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That is the story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And still working on it, right? Still working on it for sure.
Yeah, it's like repentance isn't a one and done thing.
No, no, not at all. I find myself in a new set of challenges, and so I'm still learning about myself, and I'm
Yeah.
still having to apologize still, but I mean, not as bad as before. So, I'm grateful for that. But definitely just working on improving quality of life for sure.
Doing a good job.
Nice.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ray tonight? So just raise your hand on the Zoom chat or your actual hand if you're on video. And
There's an actual hand
yeah,
right there.
there we go. Hey, Michelle.
Hi there. Well, this is so moving. I'm kind of at a loss. Thank you. It seems to me that receptivity is such a gift of yours. You were called, but you also listened. And it makes me wonder if there are in our work trying to support people in lovingly in kind of looking in the mirror and being honest. Are there questions? I know, David, you've helped me before. What are questions I could ask somebody to really prompt that examination to be more ready? And I don't know if there are any that you have in your coursework or anything that you might share with us, but it's kind of that fine line of being loving and supportive and also discerning.
Right, for sure. Yeah, no, great question. I usually ask a lot of the men and women, like, reflective questions. Where do you really see yourself, and are your current choices supporting that? Because a lot of people they have an idea, right? They're like, oh, I want to be a father, I want to be a provider, I want to be this and that, and then it's like, okay, that's great, right? That sounds pretty typical of a lot of people, but how are your actions reflecting that today? And so, like, you tell me that you want to, I want to be a provider. Well, what are you doing today that's like preparing you for that? Are you investing in yourself? Are you taking a trade? Are you going to school? Are you, working on personal development, and so it's no judgment. It's just like, and it makes them think like, oh, well, maybe I could be doing more, and so I feel like that's kind of gives them a pathway to what to work on, because I often mention that, our character defects support our addictions and the lifestyle choices. So we got to be able to recognize those and learn to address those. Because if we don't, we're going to fall back into those, those patterns, those word patterns. And so just try to encourage that self-awareness in any way possible, honesty, and sometimes they do a real good job at seeing it, because they know themselves better than anyone. And they're like, yeah, you know what, this has been a factor, this gets in the way. Okay, so what's the behavioral plan? What are you going to do? What are you going to do to counter that? How are you working on that today? And how can I support you? That's the one thing that I usually like. How can I support you? What can we do? Do you need me to check in on you? Like, hey, where you at with this? And so, yeah.
Awesome. Susan, I see your hand is up.
Unmute, Susan.
You're muted. There you go.
All right, sorry. Ray, your method of questioning to me is all about observation, about almost like counselors who want to hear someone tell their own story and you tell it back to them. It's not like you're providing any answers, particularly specifically, but in encouraging them to think more deeply about themselves. You're not lecturing them. You're not telling them how to think or anything, are you? You
No.
really just, because I would love to have a whole list of the kind of questions you ask.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I want to support the work in any way I can. But
'Cause I think that's something our chaplains could benefit from greatly.
yeah, no, absolutely.
Would you have-
I feel like you empower people when they arrive at the conclusion themselves. When
Yeah.
they like, when they think through it and they're like, yeah, you know what, that makes sense. Like they have the answer. You're just facilitating that process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, is that something you'd be willing to send to David? Just
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
bunch of a whole bunch of questions that you ask on a regular basis, because you probably have the same ones
Yes,
in
I do.
many cases.
I actually do.
Use
Yes.
a lot.
Yeah.
I would love that. I mean, yeah, that's something I was trained to do in teaching drama in a classroom, not to ever ask a question with a yes or no answer.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, for sure. I could try to compile some that I feel like have been effective and have caused a lot of thinking for people.
Thank you, thank you.
Marilyn,
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing Susan said. We could really, really benefit from that, Ray, because we have had a couple of guys get out recently, and we're not asking them the right questions, and they're I don't see them really. A couple of them, I don't see them really wanting to be responsible and move forward in any way. They're just happy that we gave them gifts and that we supported them the first couple months, but I don't see them making any changes. So those questions that you ask will be so helpful. Thank you.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that helps me is like growing up, no expectations were placed on me. So there was nothing to aim for, right? I didn't disappoint nobody. So now when I like when I deal with guys, I set that bar, like, hey, this is what you told me. So like, and so that expectation is there because they established it. I didn't, they did. So it's just kind of holding them accountable to their own, I guess, perception of what they, envision for their life. And that's always kind of, now that puts the onus on them, right? It's not me. It's like, well, this is what you said. So like, how are you, fulfilling that? How are you holding up And so kind of they can't argue with themselves. They're like, yeah, you're right. So, you know.
Oh, can I ask another thing? Did you, when you got into the Bible, those 10 commandments and those beatitudes are foundational. I mean, to our government, to everything. And if you grew up without any of those, did you feel an a kinship with them, a desire to follow them? Because freedom without law isn't freedom, it's anarchy.
Right.
Yeah, so anyway.
I think one of the things that like I remember feeling early on or thinking about is reading Proverbs and like wisdom there. I'm like, man, why didn't someone teach me this when I was a kid? Probably would have kept me from a lot of craziness.
Yeah.
I always told myself, if I ever get an opportunity to start a family, we're reading Proverbs. Yeah, it's just because I feel like there's so much wisdom there, so much like wisdom for the naive, the simple-minded, and so yes, that's definitely and something I encourage all the time for sure. So yeah, a definite connection. Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you, Ray. Oh, Michelle, one
Sorry,
more.
just one more. And sorry, this may be a little nitty gritty and I apologize, but thinking about things that we support and a fellow I know, you mentioned early on that you had a lot of markings, tattoos. Do you find that removal of that has a role in the transformation or not? And I'm sorry if that's too personal a question, but
Oh no, not at all. I've never really considered it. The only reason, I mean, don't get me wrong, I grow out my hair because my head's tattooed. I hide that part, the obvious. But I think for me, it was just like that would be so much because of like what I've done to my body. And so I'm like, that just too much, like for me, and that's why I've never really entertained the idea. But I feel like it comes down to identity, it really does, and oftentimes people, those tattoos are identity markers for them, and until they change that part, they're still going to be attached to them. So like, when working with guys who are tattooed, it's just kind of getting them to reevaluate, like, well, who are they? Who are you? Aside from those tattoos, who are you? And so as long as they lose their meaning to them, I think that they will be able to succeed, but if they're still attached to them, you know yeah. And I've seen guys cover up and still get involved. So yeah, it's just kind of hard to say. So I think I would attack it at the root, more of an identity issue than anything.
thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Yes, absolutely.
This is really, really good stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody having me and joining, and hopefully it helped to inform the work that you guys do. Love what you guys do. Like I said, people that showed up is what really helped me in my journey. So thank you guys for what you guys do, and let's continue the work. Let's continue the work because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. For sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming out tonight.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
sharing that journey. And I'll remind everybody one more time that our next Angel Team meeting will be in 2 weeks on Thursday, the 19th of September, where we'll be continuing to discuss how we can support people once they walk out those doors and are re-entering society. So
And Ray, come, you can come.
Yeah.
You're not excluded.
I would love to, for sure. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.